Hello everyone, nice to see you again. I'm now back again for this video. From last time I think it was just Joel doing John chapter 6, the start of it, and now we're moving on to John chapter 6 verses 16 to 21.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what we're doing. It's when Jesus doesn't calm the storm, but the disciples are on the boat and he walks on water. So we're going to show a little video clip now. The guy narrating is a bit of a boring voice, but it is a really good representation of what Jesus did. So stick with it.
When evening came, Jesus' disciples went down to the lake, got into a boat, and went back across the lake towards Capernaum. Night came on, and Jesus still had not come to them. By then a strong wind was blowing and stirring up the water. The disciples had rowed about 3 or 4 miles when they saw Jesus walking on water. Coming near the boat, and they were terrified.
Don't be afraid. It is I.
Then they willingly took him into the boat. And immediately the boat reached land at the place they were heading for.
So yeah, that's the continuation of the videos that we're going through with John, just to give you an overview of the boat and the whole situation. And Beth's going to just give us an overview of what we've just seen.
Yep. And then we're going to go through it verse by verse for the 5 verses or 6 verses that was read. Okay, so basically Jesus put his disciples into a boat and told them to cross the lake. That's the starting point. Then a storm came when Jesus wasn't there. Jesus then came to them and he walked on the water. He said, "Do not be afraid." And instantly they arrived where he had sent them. That's kind of the overview of what the sort of verses entail. And now we're going to break those down to more specific points.
Yeah, so it seems pretty obvious as to what he did. They literally just... He sent them on a boat, storm came, he came, they went there. It's as simple as that. But there's loads in it. So verse 16 is, we know from Mark's Gospel as well that Jesus actually sent them out across the lake and that he was watching them the entire way. So I think, it was Mark's Gospel that Jesus was just on the shoreline, always looking. So he sent them on the boat. I guess the disciples probably didn't know that they were being watched, but Jesus was always watching them, which is really important. The disciples knew the lake very well as well. It was where they fished all the time. So they were probably very frustrated because they had reached halfway, because a few verses down, it takes them 3 or 4 hours just to cross half the lake, which is taking ages. So they're rowing through the night, so they're probably pretty frustrated. And that is a picture of how Jesus sometimes tells us to do things, so he sent them out on the boat, which seem frustrating and like he's not there during them. But obviously, as we know, he's always watching, always guiding us into what he knows to be the best path for us. So he sent them across the lake, and he knew that is where they should go. But from the disciples' viewpoint, they were probably thinking, this is ridiculous. It usually takes us 2 hours to cross this lake. There's a massive storm going on. Why did he send us across the lake? Why didn't he just come with us? They would have had lots of questions about this. And they'd just seen the feeding of the 5,000. So they probably took lots of loaves of those leftover bread on the boat with them. So they were thinking he's just done all this. And now we're just stuck rowing. My arms hurt. And it's been hours. It would have been a pretty difficult time for them. Frustrating and difficult, they aren't making progress.
Yeah, and like life in general, the sea then, as we say, became rough. But we know that Jesus has control over all the elements. So like when he calms the storm in the boat, but he actually let the storm happen in the first place. He let the disciples come to a place where they felt frustrated, annoyed, upset. They might not be scared, but they had to come to that place first. And sometimes Jesus may tell us to do something, or we feel it's right after praying to do something, and actually when we become frustrated and we feel defeated or scared, we might be like, oh God, thank you very much. Like, why has this happened to me? I thought this is what I was supposed to be doing. But actually, Jesus had his eye on the boat the whole time and actually allowed the storm to be rough. And sometimes he allows things to be difficult for us in life, and then we get through those times and come out as better people. We learn, we become more like Jesus, and then we look back and we're like, oh, that's why I went through that. And sometimes when you're going through it and you're frustrated and angry, you think, what on earth is happening? Why is God let this happen? But afterwards you can see why. So it's about persevering really and trusting.
Yeah, no, exactly. Verse 19. So it is 3 or 4... like we said, 3 or 4 miles is a long time. It would have been about 3 a.m. at this point as well. So they're battling the elements after they were told by Jesus to go. So they were told by Jesus to go, and they still face these storms. So God allows things to be very difficult sometimes for us. This is to perfect us. Like Beth was saying, you have to grow through suffering. Obviously, we grow through encouragement sometimes and things like that. But I think the main primary focus of our lives as Christians is to suffer for the gospel, because once we suffer, we understand other people's suffering, we understand Jesus' suffering, we understand why heaven is so great as well. There's so many different facets of why we should enjoy, hopefully, and accept suffering to be a part of the Christian life. So they probably were accepting this as well, but they were frustrated. It's okay to be frustrated with it all, but it's to perfect us. Why would we need faith and trust if things were always fine? So Jesus always tells us to have faith and always tells us to trust, because he understands that life is difficult and sometimes he allows it to be difficult for us. Also, they were afraid when they saw Jesus as well, which is a bit odd, because I was thinking they've rowed this lake loads of times. The sea wouldn't have been that rough on this lake, so they weren't as scared as they would have been, when Jesus calmed the storm. They wouldn't have been that scared, because I don't think it would have been that rough. They were more frustrated and they felt defeated and they felt like their whole thing was futile because they were rowing for so long and it just wasn't getting them anywhere. But they were actually afraid when they saw Jesus, not because of the storm, because they must have thought they'd seen a ghost. So we can kind of guess from that they were not expecting to see Jesus. They were not expecting any supernatural help at all, because they thought, Jesus has told us to cross the lake, I'm going to cross the lake. It was simple as that. They weren't thinking, oh, Jesus is going to save us from a storm or whatever. They were just thinking, I'm just going to cross the lake because Jesus has told me to, which is great. But they were doing that in their own strength. That is a picture of us trying to row and row and row because Jesus has told us to row. But then they were scared when they actually saw Jesus. When they actually came to help, they were scared. They were like, oh, I was doing this on my own. I don't, what's that? I don't need you. It's that sort of thing. It's a picture of us trying to do God's will on our own, not seeking for help and doing it all in our own strength. When Jesus came, they were not comforted but afraid until he spoke, obviously. But when they actually saw him first, they were afraid, which I thought was interesting.
And then verse 20, when we were preparing this, this actually is one of the part of the chapter that was Joel's favourite verse, which says, it is I, do not be afraid. So actually Jesus' presence was all they needed to be reminded that he's there, and that is what we need sometimes, even when we're struggling and going through things, just knowing that we've got the Holy Spirit with us and we can know Jesus is with us through it. It just encourages us to keep going and reminds us and keeps our focus on Jesus rather than on the struggles, really. And actually they didn't expect him to come, and as Joel said before, and they were scared at first, but when they actually recognised it was him, they were comforted, which is really cool.
Exactly. Even amidst the storm, they were still comforted as soon as Jesus spoke the words. So when they recognised it was Jesus, that was it. They were comforted.
This is the last verse, I think, now, isn't it?
Yeah, the last verse, 21. Jesus brought them to exactly where they needed to go. So I thought it was a bit weird as well, because I read it and they were immediately on land. So that extra half of the lake that they didn't cross during the storm, Jesus almost teleported them there, which I thought was cool, which is a miracle. For me, it seems like even more of a miracle than walking on water itself. They literally teleported across the lake. So all that rowing, after being told to do it by Jesus himself, then the storm, they obviously felt like what they were doing was useless. And we can feel like that so often. All the work we put out, for example, if we're doing work in a job and you're not getting appreciated, no one's taking any notice of the work you're doing, it's almost a picture of that. They were feeling useless, like they could not get any further. And they probably even felt a little disappointed as well, because in the previous, when they fed the 5,000, they all tried to make him king. And the disciples were probably like, oh yes, finally, everyone else is noticing how great Jesus is, let's make him king. And when he withdrew and didn't want to be king, they may have felt a bit disappointed about that. So they may have wanted like this Jewish king to overthrow the Romans or whatever, but they probably felt a little bit disappointed about that, a little bit disappointed about the storm, a little bit disappointed about not arriving when they should do. So they're really just defeated, downhearted. Don't think they were as scared as when he calmed the storm. That's one of the main points we want to make. They were in this place of disappointment, frustration, defeation, feeling utterly useless. That's when Jesus arrives and reassures them that he is with them and instantly takes them across the lake. So he's saying, don't do it in your own strength. You're just going to struggle. It's just, you're not going to get there. It's futile. But when he appears, he takes them himself across the lake instantly and says, look, I'm going to do the rest. But they needed to realise first that they should be looking for supernatural help, not be scared when they see it. Just take it. And they did. And Jesus said, I'm with you. And they thought, great, and took them straight across the lake. So, yeah, really good.
So, yeah, that's our kind of thoughts on the first, or the 5-6 verses that we did. And I'm just going to summarise, sort of, so you can remember bits easier rather than kind of lots of information being spoke at you. So basically, this is a real picture of the Christian life, this story. So yeah, it's hard at times, as we've said, and it seems futile at points. We'll sometimes feel utterly defeated, and just like God doesn't care about us, and why is he putting us through all these hardships? If he loved us, why would he do this? But actually, we need to remember that he's always in control. He's always watching our boat in the storm. And he's always praying for us. He's not surprised about what happens. He knows what's going to happen, so he's never shocked. So even though we're like, what's going on? We don't know. Actually, God's in control, and we can trust that, and nothing will happen that he's surprised at. And he's actually always ready to show his power at work in us and his majesty in full. To those who trust that whatever situation you're going through, it's actually all controlled by God. So it might be, I don't know, you might be going through a really real hardship, I'm not sure what it would be. Maybe you're struggling at school, maybe you're getting bullied, maybe you're worried about, you've chosen options but then they haven't worked out for what you want to do, you're not sure about going to uni, all these things, and you feel like they're real hardships and stuff. Actually, God knows what you're going through. He knows you, and he knows what you can cope with, and he knows... he's looking and watching and praying for you, and he puts us through these things so that we can grow closer to him and to learn, and so he can, as Joel said before, as so he can show his power working, really, isn't it?
Yeah, like when you said praying for us, because that is amazing as well. It does say that in the Bible, that Jesus actually prays for us. So I can imagine him looking at the disciples on that boat as they cross that lake and praying for them, even though he knows what's going to happen. It's very, very interesting. But yeah, amazing. Next time, I think it's Jesus is the bread of life. When he talks to the Jews about bringing the bread of life, talks to his disciples about bringing the bread of life. We'll go through that as well. But we just wanted to make this one quite short because there's so much in it. And it's explained more, I think, in Matthew and Mark a little bit further about how Peter asks, can I walk on water with you too? That's the same event here. But the way John describes it is in a different light, which is amazing. Again, you see all these different gospel writers explaining it how they see it, And it's really interesting how John sees it as a futile, frustrating thing, and Jesus comes and takes them to their destination instantly.
Yeah, I think for me, I thought, oh, what are we going to get out of 6 verses? But actually, there's so much in that it's you couldn't just skip it. I've learnt a lot through that, and specific things, what they mean, and
I think going through John, both of us, we've every time it's like, oh, Jesus feeds the 5,000. We've so many times in Sunday school. There's always stuff to get out of it every single time you read it, even if it's just a word or a verse. It's always something to get out of it. So keep reading the Bible, guys, as much as you can, and it is very interesting when you get into it.
Yeah, and we hope that you have a good week. And as we said on the message, we'll be releasing these now every Thursday. So it's something that's sort of in the middle of the week, that including church. And we've got some exciting new things ready for September, which we'll get in contact with you soon about. And we'll see you next time. So bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.